Dimitri, are you still here without my looking?
Yes, I'm still here.
And I want to thank you for doing the marvelous work that you do for the club, bringing excellent content every Saturday. Uh, Perhaps people don't know how much work that takes to research, to look on the YouTube, on Google, and then find and bring in people as excellent as that Steve was. A beautiful presentation, a fantastic and interesting man. Never going to find anything like that anywhere else. So I think we should all give a round of applause to Dimitri for doing this. Okay. Uh, Having said that, Rich, you're all set with the recording now?
Yes, it's
Okay.
good to go.
So let's segue into our next portion here. And I believe that we do have, I checked, we have Barry Kreitzer and we have Michelle with her dad. Let's just make sure that the audio is okay. Michelle, would you just like to unmute for a second and let's see that everything's okay? Yeah, I know she's here. I saw her checked in.
Okay, here I am.
Okay, Michelle, thank you very much. So just
Hi.
stand by and let me just make sure Barry's audio is okay. Barry Kreitzner and your son Steve, are you here?
Yeah, we're here.
Does your camera work, Barry, or is it just going to be audio?
We're just going to do audio today because he's kind of bandaged from the surgery yesterday.
Oh, that's right. Okay, thank you so much for coming. And then Jim in California, are you here, Jim?
I'm here.
Okay, Jim. Let me just make the introductions here. We had an article that was done on the Long Island CW Club and actually featured my 16-year-old daughter who was taking Rob K2MZ's classes. Jim, if you could mute for a minute, I think we got you on the screen. Okay. It's funny. I just see you, Jim. I don't know why. All right. So this article was done on the club, and then as a sideline, the newspaper got contacted by Nick DeLeo, who's a 98-year-old World War II veteran, and also at the same time, Barry Kreitzner contacted the newspaper, who's a Korean War veteran, and they wanted to speak to us about their experiences with CW. So I made an initial contact with both of them, and I found that their conversations were so exciting and so different that I figured this should really be something that should be portrayed to the entire club and even for posterity. So in the meantime, we made a PowerPoint based on some of the initial information that both Nick and Barry gave to me based on their experience, which I have to thank Jim W6JIM, who's always making these PowerPoints for all our presentations we do to various clubs and also within our club. And Jim, why don't you bring that up and I'll go through it just briefly. And then we'll introduce Nick, who will talk. And then we'll go with Barry. So Nick Leo, World War II and Korean vet, started to tell me about his CW background. And I actually played some CW for him and he got it. I sent him an SOS and he copied it. He hadn't copied CW maybe in 40 years, so he told me. So why don't you go to the next page, Jim? So there's a picture of Nick when he was younger, handsome young man. And he will tell you that he was in the Ghost Army and also the Battle of the Bulge. Now, the Battle of Bulge was a very big offensive that the Germans made as a last hurrah to push the Americans out of Western Europe after D-Day. It was a terrible battle in the middle of the winter, and many men died in that, not only from bullets and bombs, but from just exposure to the winter. They had some of the worst winters in history in 1945 in Europe. Actually, my dad was on a forced march from a prison camp, and he told me about that himself. There was nothing to eat, and it was freezing. Okay, let's do the next slide. So the Ghost Army, I think before we have Nick speak about the Ghost Army, we'll play a video introducing what it was all about. This was an army that the Americans made of kind of pseudo and fake equipment and men to fool the Germans to thinking that there were more men and battle equipment in one part, and then the real army went the other way. And supposedly this was very classified until a few years ago. So Jim, why don't you play the video to give everybody a little bit of a background before Nick speaks? So that'll save him some of the time of figuring, of explaining this to us. So we had a nice video from the Ghost Army website. So it's not too long, Jim, right? Is the audio shared, Jim?
We were going to be in show business where we set up one-night stands and like ghosts disappear.
And the mission was to try to be able to take 1,000 men and put them in so that 15,000 men could move somewhere else and not be detected.
We were told we couldn't tell our wives or anybody about what we did. It was totally secret.
It's amazing the fakery that we were able to perpetrate upon the enemy.
It was a little bundle of stuff, all compressed before you opened the bundle, spread the nozzles around, and inflated it.
The artillery piece was good, but that M4 tank, that was the beauty. That was a piece of work.
Back of my half-track, I tell my children, was the biggest boombox you ever saw, but it played sounds of tanks and activity.
They had the recordings of building a pontoon bridge or any type of bridge, and you could hear them hammering away and swearing. And
we were turned loose in town. Go to the pub, order some omelets, and talk loose.
You mean we're asking for the enemy to fire on us? The answer was yes. At that point, we all came to the conclusion that this was a suicide outfit.
And a shell landed in front of us, and then the shell flew over our heads and hit the truck behind us.
People probably no more than 20, 30 feet away from me that lost limbs because of shrapnel just falling all over.
If you're in the wrong place, you can be dead. If you're in the right place, you can live to be as old as I am.
You go up against the best army there is and the best group of soldiers, and you can dupe them successfully, you pat yourself on the back.
There are German records that show that some of the deceptions were taken hook, line, and sinker. The 23rd did not win the war single-handedly, but I think it would have cost a lot more American casualties had they not been there.
You know you saved lives, you don't know how many you saved, but you know you saved them.
He did.
They estimated that we saved between 15 and 30,000 lives with our maneuvers. But even if we'd only saved 15 or 30, it was worth it.
One mother or one new bride
was spared the agony of putting a gold star in their front window.
Jim, why don't we stop the video now, because that gives the background. People can watch that a little bit later. And I think that we'll come back to the PowerPoint, but let's bring on Nick now, and let's talk to him and see about his CW and Morse code experience during the war. Nick, let's see if we can get you unmuted. And how are you, Nick?
I'm old.
You know, Nick, for someone who's old, God bless you. You are so sharp and so like young in thought. We should all wind up to be in the way you matured. So,
by the way, you know that one guy, Gil Seltzer, on the movie?
yeah,
He's 106, still alive.
106. Oh my God.
And the last guy, Stanley Nance, he was a radio man. He's 102.
Well, I expect you to get to 106 and pass your buddies too, okay?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know, Nick, why don't we start from the beginning? Because I know we talked about 5 or 10 minutes, but I wanted to save this for the club. Can you tell me how you got started with Morse code? Like, let's start this way. You got into the service. What year did you go into the service? Do you remember?
Yeah, they sent me to Oregon to the 104th Infantry Department. And in the 104th, they first put me in ammunition pioneer. I was chopping trees and digging holes. I didn't like that.
What year was that? Do you remember? Was that like 1941 or something, or 40?
1941.
41.
Yeah.
And then Nick, when did they decide to make you a radio operator, and what was that like going? Tell us about how they made the decision, and what was it like in radio school?
That's what I was leading up to. I complained about being an ammunition pioneer. I talked to an officer. So they took me out and they put me in an anti-tank. I was like a horse pulling a 37 millimeter anti-tank gun. So then I talked to the communications officer. His name was Dr. Lieutenant Roland. And I said, look, I'm from New York. I can read and write, man. You got to do something. Get me out of this stuff. So he says, well, how would you like radio? I said, yeah. He says, well, what do you do? I said, well, I know music. So he says, oh, you're good. So the next day I was in the radio department, and they taught us Morse code, and then they decided to send me to Fort Benning, Georgia, to communication school. So they made me a corporal, and in Fort Benning, we used the 284 radio set. There was 2 of us operating it, and I broke the record in sending and receiving the most messages. So they made me a buck private.
You know, your memory is incredible, Nick. I can't believe that. You know, I would say there's many of us here in this very meeting that wouldn't be able to remember what we did last week, and you're telling us something from 1942. So what was, because we like the old ways that they used to teach Morse code, and I have some videos about this too. Do you remember how they taught you in school, and how long it took to learn it, and anything about it?
Well, to learn the key, we were a bunch of us were put in a room, and there was an instructor, and he taught us one by one. We got the code, and I picked it up right away. And after Fort Benning, Georgia, they sent me back to Oregon, and they made me a staff sergeant, communications chief, and I was in charge of radio, message center, and wire section.
Now, were they teaching you, Nick, because I have one of those units, was it like a machine that had a tape, almost like a ticker tape in it, or were they using some sort of sound?
Well, the guy talked it most of the time, and he showed us too, because he was good at it. And so we just followed suit, you know. but we didn't have no. I don't remember tapes.
Okay, maybe I'll show you a video this one day of the early 1940s tape-driven practice machines. We have one in the club. Okay, so you became a radio operator, so you knew how to repair the radios, and they taught you the electronics too?
Well, only a little bit. We used to. I remember when we used to have trouble out in the field. All we did was kick it, and it used to work.
Well, I would say up to transistors came, most of the time, anything with tubes that you kicked was the first, or you bang was the first thing you did to get it to work. Then if it didn't work, you'd repair it. Okay, so where did you go from there, Nick?
Well, I went back to Oregon, of course, but then they asked for, they asked for volunteers for a special mission. And you just couldn't volunteer. You had to have an IQ of 130. You had to know radio. You had to be a singer or a dancer or an actor. I don't know, did you ever hear Bill Blass?
No.
He's a designer.
He was big designer in New York. He was in our outfit. And Douglas Fairbanks Jr., you know him?
Of course.
Yeah, well, he was in our outfit. We had some big time people in our outfit.
Well, actually, Clark Gable was flying in my dad's outfit out of the UK.
Yeah. The guys in my outfit in the Ghost Army, I have to say, they were the best. I mean, after the war ended, a lot of guys you saw in that movie are dead now. Like John Jarvie was on there, he's dead now. And there's a couple other guys, but most of them died. But a lot of them, we talked. I still talk every day with one from Ohio, and Stanley Nance in Salt Lake City, and Gil Seltzer, and there's a couple of. They used to talk to my wife because they met my wife in France too, and but one by one we just get in line, and we don't know who's the next to go. But look, I'm 98 now. Gil Seltzer is 106. He's got a girlfriend, by the way.
How old is she? 25?
No, she's up there too. I don't know how old. She looks nice.
So tell me, Nick, tell us, since we're all interested in Morse code, when was the last time you actually used Morse code after you left the service, if you remember? And
well, after I left the Army, the war was over. But I had a lot of friends in the Naval Reserve. And they said, come on, join the Naval Reserve. It's a lot of fun. So I did. Next thing you know, Korea opened up. I was grabbed. So I was on the Gatling, the destroyer, they call the Gatling, the USS Gatling. They made me, since I had the experience, they made me a radio man. And on the Gatling, we used to go on duty 4 hours. That's only when we were out to sea. 4 hours on and 8 hours off. But every time we went on duty, there was three radio men in the radio shack that was taken. We had to take all messages, whether they were for us or not. And I didn't like the Navy as much as the Army.
okay, let's hold on to the Korean War. We'll go in chronological order. So after you trained here, I guess from Washington, you got involved with the Ghost Army, and then you went over to Europe. Now, were you at D-Day, or did they bring you in by parachute or by ship after that?
Oh no, we were sent from Camp Kilmer here in Jersey by ship to southern England, and in England we were put on an estate, a private estate, but we put up tents. We lived in tents. And we prepared for the invasion. We had to waterproof all the equipment. And then At one point, we had to move. I think it was Southampton we had to go to. And we went, not all of us, some of us. I was in the beginning. We went halfway across the channel on a big ship, and then in the middle of the channel someplace, we went over the side onto what a big rectangular boat that had 2 engines on the back. And I was up front with the lieutenant, and we got into Normandy late at night, but we couldn't make the shore because of the waters. And I think one engine was knocked out or something. But at one point, the lieutenant says, "Let's go." So we went. Me and the lieutenant jumped into the water. We never made the shore. Well, we had to swim ashore. And they told us, get off the beach and go as far inland as you can. We'll get together later.
Okay, so Nick, why don't you tell us now? Okay, so is the first time you did any real radio communication work for the Army, was that in the when you were already in Europe? Was this?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
When we got to France.
Okay, so you're in Normandy. Tell us now. So obviously, since you kind of peacefully got to Normandy, that was after D-Day. No one was shooting at you at that particular moment.
Shoot, you couldn't believe it.
Oh, they were still. So this was after D-Day. You were still being shot at then?
Yeah, after D-Day. I mean, D-Day. I could never explain it to anybody how bad it was. But I ended up with the 1st Infantry Division, and I was with them. That's the hedgerow fighting. And then at one point they sent word for all the Ghost Army guys to go back someplace. And we got together. They were all over the place.
But what I was asking, Nick, when you went on the shore, was there any fighting still when you were coming?
When we were coming in, we were being bombarded with artillery. You can't believe the artillery.
So Nick, then correct me. Did you get to Europe during D-Day or after D-Day?
At night. At night on D-Day.
D-Day, Jesus. This is amazing, Nick. So tell us about your radio experience when you're in Normandy already, and when did you start transmitting? What was your duties like? What type of equipment did you use? And you were telling me what type of pressure were you under to get to decode the Morse code correctly? Could you just talk now as much as you want to about what your radio experience was once you landed there?
Well, I didn't get to use the radio for a couple of weeks first before I got back with my unit. And then when we got set up, and when we got into an area like from in Normandy, we went south through Marie Saint-Église, which is a big battle, and then down to Brest, the museum where they had the Germans had the submarine base, and we set up there, and we set up nets with radio, and usually it was 4 or 5 or 6 guys in different places. They set us up, and it was mostly radio silence, and we dealt only with code, 5-letter code, and then. The Germans, they used to jam us with, it sounded like birds continuously, or bagpipes. We call them bagpipes. And they tried to jam you so you couldn't get through. And but we dealt with it, and if we had to send a message, it had to really be important. And if you did, you had about 2 minutes, because after you sent it, you had to move, because they would triangulate on you, and that would be you.
Boy,
Yes.
I mean, that must have been very scary in a way to transmit under that type of pressure, and then realize you had to do it in 2 minutes, get it right. And then
Yeah.
if you're being jammed, what if you were being jammed, Nick? Did you have to repeat it?
Oh yeah, we had to repeat it as much as we can, or safely anyway. We couldn't do it too long. And you know, with all the bombs from artillery, we were subjected to artillery more than anything else. I think most of the guys in my outfit were earplugs. I mean,
Hearing aid.
hearing aids. Me too. I got them too. And but it's because of the noise that we had to go through. But we had some tough places sometimes.
Nick, do you remember how big your equipment was, or do you remember what type of radios they looked like? Or, I mean, if you saw pictures of it, would you be able to recognize it?
I might, I don't know. But we worked in combat. We worked with the 193 mostly. I was trained on the 284, but we have one 193. I think we had a 199. I don't know if there was any more.
You mean, are those, is that the model numbers of the equipment, Nick?
Yeah,
So it was 193, 199, and what was the other one?
284.
I bet you these began with BC, like BC 193 or something like that.
Could be. I don't remember that.
But these were transmitters, or were they actually transmitters and receivers, or did you just have?
It was both. We could receive and we could send.
We are going to look these up later. 193, 199, 284, and this was 1945. So maybe we can figure out what this is, and I'll be able to send you some pictures of it for you to identify. You know?
Good. Okay.
Were
But,
they heavy, Nick? Were they heavy?
Well, they were set up in a weapons carrier. Used to be a 3/4 ton truck.
A
in the
truck.
back of the truck, and we usually had 3 or 4 men, all of them radio men. So we took our turns on that.
You know, Nick, you remind me, there's a museum down in Baltimore. I think it's called the National Electronics Museum. And I have some pictures of it. They had a World War II truck with the equipment there inside the museum. And maybe I can get some pictures of that too. I think I have a picture on my phone and I can send it to you. It might bring back some memories.
No, I don't want no memories, to tell you the truth. I can't talk to this day. There's certain thing oh, excuse me. Just thinking about it, I can't talk. I don't want to know anymore. Me and my buddies, we talk on the phone all the time. We never mention anything bad. Only the good times.
Well, Nick, I didn't know that. I mean, do you want to continue talking? Is this too painful for you to remember?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. There's some things I just can't talk about it.
Yeah, well, we don't really want to talk about the battle, Nick. I mean, we just wanted to talk about, you know, your connection to radio, because we'd all love to hear it. Is it okay to talk about that, or?
Yeah, sure.
All right. You know, the last thing we want to do is upset you or bring back any memories. What, somebody has who shared that? Is that the 190?
Jim.
That's the SRC 284.
That's the
Yeah.
284.
Yeah, that has a crank, right?
Yes.
Yes.
It's right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I use that first. There had to be one guy cranking all the time.
And you
for the
mean,
power.
what was the crank for? Changing the frequency? So because you.
No. The crank was to keep it powered.
Okay, then that was the power supply. That would be on a separate box, you know, a separate.
There was a guy. The guy would straddle the seat, and the crank would be in front of him and be turning right and left hand.
Well, does this look like it's a long time ago, Nick? But does this look something like you experienced?
It could be. It's a long time. I haven't remembered though.
And how about the key, Nick? You see the key, it has a cover over it?
The T?
The key, the Morse code key. You see it in the front there? It has like.
Oh, yeah, right. That looks good.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for pulling that out of the out of the ether there. That's terrific. Okay, so how many months or weeks were you actually in this type of situation where you were sending Morse code and then sending for 2 minutes and then regrouping? And how long did that last? To the end of the war?
Yeah, I guess till most of the end of the war.
But
Yeah, we moved from France, from Normandy. Like I told you, the first place with I think Marie Saint-Église, then what was I telling, the submarine base, and then St. Lo was a big battle.
Oh, you mentioned St. Lo. Actually, so I was mentioning before, some people know, my dad was in a B-17. He was actually the radio operator in a B-17 in St. Lo. They bombed 3 times. They did 3 missions over St. Lo.
Oh, yeah. The Germans held us up for a while there. And then after St. Lo, the Germans started to retreat. And that's what they call the Cognac ride through France, from St. Lo to the Meurthe-Moselle. At the Meurthe-Moselle, the whole army ran out of fuel because the Red Bull Express couldn't keep up with us. They were moving so fast. So we had to make a stand at Meurthe-Moselle. And then from there, we headed up north to Luxembourg. And we were in Luxembourg when the Germans counterattacked. And then in Malmedy, in Belgium, the Germans captured 200 guys, of Americans, and they shot them down with a machine gun.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. 4 guys played dead underneath the dead people. And they stayed still until the Germans left. And that's how we found out the whole story.
Now, Nick, did you see the Ghost Army? Now, you were part of the Ghost Army. Did you actually see these tanks and pieces of equipment that were props? Did you
Oh,
see?
yeah, sure. We had, in the Ghost Army, we had a headquarters. There was an office, like, where the officers went usually. But we had a motor pool because somebody had to work on the trucks and the equipment. We had a signal unit that the radio men were, and we had wire. My buddy in Ohio was in wire and telephone. He got his ears blown out. I talk to a lot of these guys every day. My buddies, every day we talk. But they're dying off, and it's going to be, at the point, I think we got 16 guys left.
Well, it's amazing that I mean, it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Amazing that they're still here, testimony to the strength and fortitude of these men. Nick, I have so many things to ask you. So getting back to the jamming, when you sent your 2-minute report, which was in 5 group letters, did the people you send it to, did they acknowledge that they received it, or you never knew that they received it?
Oh, no, you would get it. They did audit R.
You got the R. Okay. So Nick, can you like go through the alphabet now for everybody? Do you remember A, B, C, D, just like you did? You just did R.
Okay, did R, da did it, da did it, da did it, did it, F, G, da did it, did da, J, K, what's next? K, da did it, da did, da did, P, Q, da did it. da. I'm mixed. Diddy da, diddy da, dee da da, da diddy da, da did it, da did it.
You know, Nick, you are absolutely amazing. I mean, you know, we teach kids now that some of are 11 years old, and I've never in my life done CW with someone who was 98. I mean, how did you stay so sharp? I mean, I can't believe you.
Well,
I mean, we got some guys in the club, Nick, that are 50 years old that are struggling, and you still remember your CW like it was yesterday. I don't know how you do it.
I did so much CW in the service. It's unbelievable. And I got to say, by the way, if you got a lot of some young guys in there, if you want to go into the service, it's a great idea because there's so much opportunity there. I have my first son was in submarines, and my third son was in the MPs. He would say 25 years. Anyway, the service, anything you want to do, you can do. They'll send you to college. You go to college for free for anything you want. There's so much opportunity, and I'm not getting paid by the Army or nothing. But I think they should make this compulsory for all people from high school.
Well, the gentleman who did the PowerPoint that we were showing before, Jim, how many years were you in the service?
30 years and 6 days.
30 days, but who's counting, right?
Right.
Well, I'll tell you, Nick, anybody who is in the service, amongst others, professions and situations, gets an automatic honorary lifetime membership into this club. And I'm pleased to announce that if you say yes to this, you will now be an honorary lifetime member, where we expect you to live to at least 106. Would you like to be an honorary lifetime member of the Long Island CW Club, Nick?
Of course I would.
All right. Well, that's great. You know, Nick, we have Barry Kreitzer, who was a Korean War vet. He's standing by. Let's bring him in to talk about his Korean War experience, and then we'll bring you back to talk about your experience on that, what was it, a destroyer that you were on or something?
Yeah, it was the USS Gatling.
Like Gatling gun, huh? Like Gatling?
That's it.
Wow. Okay, what a great name. So why don't you stand by? That was very riveting. Barry has a tough act to follow here, but Barry, why don't you come in, Steve? If you can get your dad to start to talk, and let's have him say hello to everybody. Barry, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Barry, first of all, thank you for coming today. I know you had a procedure on your eyes. You know, I'm glad that you're okay, and I thank you very much for reaching out to me and you know, through the Newsday, and then coming to talk. Jim, in California, Jim, why don't you get to the PowerPoint and show a few pictures of Barry while he was in the service? Well, that wasn't Barry. If you go back, that's if you go back for a second, Jim, to that other picture. No, that I think is either a early 50s or mid 50s depiction of what radio equipment used to look like in the mid 50s. I'm not too sure because it's not dated. And unfortunately, the Cosmopolitan magazine that's down to the lower left, I couldn't see the date even with a magnifying glass. Okay, why don't we go to the next pictures? So Barry is where the arrow is. You could tell us, Barry, what year do you think this is?
This is 1955.
1950, yes, actually it says that. And that's in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Okay, go to the next slides, Jim.
Excuse me.
Well, we'll go back to the demon. Let's see the more of the pictures of Barry that you had up there. There you go. So Barry, is this in Korea?
This is in Korea.
My God, do you know about where?
That's in Uijeonbu. That was my squad tent. Our radio was in the hillside at the top of the mountain. The rest of the headquarters division was in the Quonset huts down at the bottom. And that was our sandbags for the radio shack.
I've been in Korea many times. Where do you remember where this was in relation to Seoul or to Ulsan at all?
North of Seoul, it's a couple of miles south of the DMZ.
Yeah, once you said north of Seoul, you don't got much to go before you get to the DMZ. So, Barry, this is great that you're here. Why don't you tell us how you got into the service, and also, just like Nick did, how you got selected to be a radio operator, and take us through that, please.
Well, I put my name up in the draft. My cousin, unfortunately, was killed in North Korea, and I felt that I had to do something for him.
What year is this now?
54.
54.
Yeah.
So the war was technically over by then, right?
There were actions that were never listed. We had what they called quick actions, but reports were never filed because they were afraid of starting another war. So we went out on patrols. We had infiltrators that we were involved with, and we also our base was infiltrated, so we had to defend our base also. And then we went out on patrols up by the DMZ, and then after that it was just basically just patrol action.
Were you there in the wintertime, Barry?
Yes.
I mean, I think Korea is like one of the coldest places that I've ever experienced. They got that wind coming out of Manchuria there. I mean, what was it like being in the winter there with just like GI clothes on and not having like
it was pretty bad, pretty bad. In fact, I slept in the tent. We had a kerosene heater, and I slept with every piece of clothing I had because we had no beds. We slept on air mattresses.
So, Barry, how did you get involved with the radio school? How did they select you?
I finished my basic training at Dick's.
Use that.
And then they came to me and said, "We want to send you to OCS." And I said, "No, thank you," because I knew if I became an officer, I would be subject to recall at any time for the rest of my life. So I said, "No, thank you." So they said, "Okay, we're going to put you in radio school." So I went to radio school. And then they had me stringing wire for a little bit. But the minute they put me up on a pole, I got right down. I said, "Don't ever send me up on a pole again. I'm never going to do that again. You can shoot me, but I'm never going up on a telephone pole."
So did they teach you, besides Morse code, did they teach you electronics too?
No, it's basically Morse code.
Okay, so what was it like to use Morse code back then, and what were your duties?
Well, just at the school, it was just learning how to do up to at least 18 words a minute. And then if you did that, they graduated you and sent you to an outfit. And unfortunately, I was needed supposedly in Korea. So they sent me out to Fort Lewis, put me on a ship. And I knew I made a mistake because I should have become a musician, because they had the band on the deck playing us off rather than being on the ship. Landed at Incheon, took us up to Uijeonbu, past Yangdangpol, past Seoul, and then established us up on the mountain. We took over an old Marine base. And scariest part was I was in the 24th Infantry Division, which unfortunately was not exactly a great lead division in Korea during the war. And my first sergeant gave me binoculars, and I looked over the border, and I could see the weapons that the North Koreans captured from the 24th when they were down south. And they were shooting, they were following us. And the sergeant told me, he says, just remember, you're the first line of defense if another invasion starts.
Okay, so how long were you in Korea, Barry?
A year.
A year. And so what were some of the radio duties that you had to do? And you know, what type of CW were you sending? Was it coded in 5-letter groups like?
Yeah, it was coded. I was with the 11th Field Artillery Battalion, and we were hooked into division. And we had connections with all the battalions and in the division. And we had to make sure we were all coordinated to be able to know what the heck was going on.
And so what type of messages did you send? Do you remember?
Just positions, enemy positions, our positions, where our patrols were going to be going. So we knew to notify the outposts when our guys were coming back from positions.
And how many hours a day were you like sending Morse code?
Well, when I got there, there were only 2 other guys at the radio besides me. So we were pulling 8 on, 16 off. And after a couple of weeks, we had an experience with a so-called ROTC lieutenant who said he wrote the book. So he pulled one of us off every day for guard duty. So we had 2 guys on the radio, no break time. And finally, my radio commander, Corporal Phil, he shut down the radio, closed us off from division. And our executive officer came up. I'll never forget, a Major Salto. He was a World War II vet, and they called him back into the service. What the hell's going on? And we told him. We never had problems with that lieutenant again. And we just pulled our 8 on, 16 off. And after about 6 months, we got a 4th guy up there. So we had enough coverage. But we kept the radio going after that.
Now, was the radio in a truck, like?
In a cave.
It was in a cave, so you had like a whole station set up in a cave, right?
If you look to the picture on the right with the sandbags, the entrance to the cave was behind those sandbags.
And is that the antenna that's kind of like behind you?
Yes.
Do you remember what type of antenna it was at all?
Oh, God, no. But talking about the gentleman prior to me about having the radio in a truck, we had a 3/4-ton truck with a radio unit in it, which we took up when we first went out on patrol. And we parked it near where we departed for our walking patrols.
Interesting. Now, Barry, not to put you on the spot, but just out of curiosity, do you remember your Morse code at all?
Unfortunately, no. I try to teach it to my grandson, but I haven't done it in 45 years. So all I remember is diddy dum dum diddy. Let's say it again.
Well, diddy dum dum diddy, a question mark.
Right.
Do you remember at all how they used to teach you Morse code or anything like that, Barry?
No.
All right. So I guess when you came back to the States, did you ever think about becoming a ham radio operator? Did that ever cross your mind, or was just life?
No, it was something I was looking to go and find a job to go to work.
What did you wind up doing for a career?
I was in a manufacturer's representative in sales. I used to sell to regional department stores.
Oh, very nice. Okay, I think then why don't we go back to Nick at this point? And Nick, what can you tell us what it was like to be on a battleship? And after this, I think there's a lot of questions that people have, maybe some things we missed. What was it like to be on the Gatling during the Korean War?
Well, the Gatling was, you think of a Gatling, it's a ship, you think it's a big ship. It's not. We were used to protect, like, the big ships that went across the sea. Like a big ship would be, think of a foot, a battling, a destroyer is only an inch. We were small. We had five 5-inch mounts, and we had 40 millimeter group of 40 millimeter guns on both sides, and all you carried on the destroyer was men and food and ammunition, and you had depth charges on the fantail. Fantail's the back of the ship, and when they got into trouble, the horn would start blasting, and you had to leave your post wherever you were. You leave one man on the radio, and you'd go what they call charger quarters. Well, my charger quarters was a 5-inch mount, and a 5-inch mount has a trainer, a pointer, a first loader, and a second loader, and a captain of the gun. I was first loader, but I couldn't put my. What happened? The second loader would press something on the floor and get the charge, and he'd have to put his in the gun first, and I'd press something on the floor and get the missile and put it in after the charge is in, and I would hit the trigger, and it would go off. But those guns, the 5 inches down below decks, they were set to explode at a certain distance. So I didn't know anything about that.
And how was getting back to the the radio communications? I guess you had a big radio room on the ship.
Yeah, there were three of us that were radio men in the radio shack at all times. We were on for 4 hours or for 8 hours. Only when we were out to sea. When we were in port, we had no duties.
And I don't think there was any jamming during the Korean War, right?
No.
Yeah. And you were never under attack during the Korean War, right?
Well, I don't want to. We had one explosion. I'll tell you that.
Okay, we won't get into that. Okay. So there's some comments that are very interesting in the chat here that I want to open up the floor now for talking. First of all, it was actually Jerry K10KD who shared the video, the screenshot with that particular radio, and then I see that another Jerry in Louisiana, N5G KJ, has given us a link to the pictures of the equipment that you were talking about, Nick.
Yeah.
Let's see now. I don't think I can get that going here. Jim, remind me, this is only the host able to activate the link? I think Rich is the only one who's able to activate that, right?
No, I think you should be able to do it.
Some of the links didn't copy over. If you don't start with HTTPS, it won't highlight. You'll have to copy and paste it manually.
Michael, do you think you can do that? Do you see that link where it says radiomilitary.com, the one from Jerry N5GKJ? Do you think you could pop that into your browser real quick and then share it? And then we're going to open up the
I'm
floor.
working on it.
Hang on, everybody. Then we got one 30-second video to show you. Jim, we'll show that the ART-13, all right? Yeah, so so it consisted of the picture below that, Michael. So I guess go up a little higher so we see that. All right, so it's like two equal looking sets. Not too big, somewhat portable. That's what it looks like. Some of the units that you mentioned to me, the 193 number. Does that ring a bell at all? I know it's been so long, Nick, but
I can't make out any details on this.
All right, yeah, it's a little bit dark, but that's the best picture we have. That's an actual photograph of a photograph.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, I just want to show, before we open up the floor to questions, there's just one more thing we want to present. When Jim made the PowerPoint for this particular presentation, he coincidentally grabbed a picture off the internet of my favorite transmitter from the World War II Korean War era. It was made by a very famous company called Collins. Jim, you want to play the video? Just go to that minute 18.24 and play this. This thing automatically tunes. This radio was in the airplanes. This was in the B-29. So let's say something happened to the radio operator. And speaking of jamming, the Germans were always jamming the frequencies. The pilot could tune this radio from like 20 feet away, which I think is amazing technology for like 1944, 1945. Just watch how this thing auto tunes. This thing, if I would love to own one of these and have it as part of my boat anchor collection, but I don't know anybody who can repair this type of monster. So why don't you play this thing, Jim?
So if you wanted to change channel, all you have to do is press the button or switch this switch here, which I'll show you in a minute, and the thing will then automatically, it actually goes back to 0, and then it clunks back into position, and I'll show you how that works. So let's give it a go.
Okay, Jim. I mean, as far as vintage gear goes, to me, that's state of the art. It's beautiful looking. But who's going to repair something like that? All the guys that know how to repair that are not necessarily around anymore. Okay, so let's open up the floor to questions and comments. Does anybody want to start off with some questions? I certainly asked a lot of questions myself, so I'm pretty well satiated. Does anybody out there want to ask a question of Nick or Barry or make a comment? Better to just speak up because I really can't read the chats, Flip. If you have a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Go ahead, Dave.
What about Indian code talkers? Any experience or contact with them in your career?
No.
Dave, from what I remember, because I read a book about the Indian code talkers, that was used in the Pacific during World War II. So I can understand that didn't hit the European theater where Nick was, and I don't think they used the code talking in the Korean War. I think it was just World War II. Any other questions? That was a good one.
Just a comment. I posted a link to a photo of the USS Gatlin in the chat. So if anybody
I'd like to see that. Thank you very much for doing that. Michael, do you think you could grab that, the link that Andy put up?
It was also in the shot that Jim had, that the 671, that was the Gatlin.
All right, well, if we could, whoever
Jim's PowerPoint.
put up the Gatlin again.
Yeah, 671, that's the Gatlin.
Wow. So there's your ship, Nick.
It's not on here.
You don't see it?
It's a little slow loading on our end.
Tell me when you see it.
Yeah, we have a circle, so. Oh, here it goes.
There it goes.
And then, Nick, I see you in the front there, right on the deck.
Yeah.
right above the number 7. There you are.
Yeah, right, I know.
I wonder where this ship is now. I'm sure it must be. They probably made the subway system in Korea out of this thing.
Well, you want to know something? When I first went into the Navy, I went to South Carolina, and the ship was in mothballs. We had to clean it all up and put it into C shape.
Wow. You probably remember that, Nick and Barry, living in New York. Do you remember going over the Hudson River, over the George Washington Bridge, and seeing the mothball fleet underneath there, just sitting there in the 1950s and 60s?
Yeah. I lived in Brooklyn, a block and a half away from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So I saw all the biggies coming in there and the repair work that they did.
Yeah, because every time we went over there, my dad would always say, "There's the mothball fleet," and that stayed there. I think maybe until I was in high school, and then God knows where all those ships went. They were probably all sold off or dismantled. Anybody else has some questions for Nick and Barry?
There's a comment from TJ, WA5CXJ, in the chat room. He says, "Wow, Barry, this is a shot in the dark. I just cleaned out my deceased cousin's house and found photos very similar to those shown just now. Finally figured out that he spent a year on the DMZ, and then I guess this is his name, C.W. Moore. Never talked about that, but kept most everything he had at the time, uniforms, his 1911 .45 caliber, binoculars, etc. Apparently TJ was the first person to see these items in many years because they were put away in storage."
It's great that these things are saved, and these things should be held onto for posterity and passed on to the young. I know that young people are not so much interested in history at this point because everything is so instantaneous, with our cell phones, but we should do our best. Rachel from the UK says that the Gatling was sold for scrap in 1977.
Oh.
Yeah, so, listen, that kind of ties into about what I was saying with the mothball fleets here, Rachel, that they were gone, about the time I was in high school. And there were hundreds of those ships underneath the George Washington Bridge. There were destroyers, there were troop carriers, there were just general freighters and things. They were one after another, and they were just rusting. Okay, let's see if we got any other comments in the chat.
Comment.
Ann says, "Thank you for your service and for your time and presentation. We all appreciate that." Flip said, "Thank you to Barry and Nick. Such an honor to hear their stories. This was amazing." John AC2KZ, "Barry and Nick, you are both representatives of the greatest generation. Thank you for your service. We all second that." TJ, we talked about.
Renee has a comment. She just tried to get in.
Yeah, Renee, what would you like to say?
To Nick and Barry, first, thank you so much for your service. It has been an honor to listen to you. And I am one of those people who is struggling with Morse code. And you just blew me away just now with knowing everything. You really did. But
well, let me ask you something, Nick. Would you like to be a teacher in our club now?
At my age, I don't go out at all no more.
No, you can do it over Zoom.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd like.
Well, I'll speak to you and your son and your daughter about that later. Maybe we could get you to be a teacher and come into some of our beginners classes and inspire everybody. because now you've inspired Renee, you know, so I'm sure this would be contagious.
Hey, Norman, I want to tell you, they wrote 4 books about us. They're called The Ghost Army.
Yeah.
We were not allowed to get any awards during the war. They gave us medals 62 years after the war ended.
Well,
I don't even look at them. They even have no meaning.
well, I know that, but listen, you know, things take a while to get these, but 62 years is a lot to declassify something that has to do with World War
Yeah,
II.
but they put up a monument in Luxembourg where the boat started for us. And the people in Luxembourg sent me emails to get me to come. Of course, I can't do that no more. But they put a monument up 74 years after the war. They have us up for a gold congressional medal. I'll never see that.
Maybe.
All right. Well, you know, maybe
They don't care. They don't care.
Let's see, before we say good day to both of you, is there any other people here that would like to make a question or make a comment before we wrap it up?
Howard, my dad has a word of advice for Renee, if you can tell it.
Oh, yes, please. Barry, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in learning Morse code, eventually everybody in my class got hung up on a certain speed level. Like I got hung up on 8 words a minute, but they pursued us and they finally got me up to 18. So if you get hung up on some words, don't give up. Just keep going because it'll come to you eventually.
What say you, Renee?
I say thank you so much for that advice, and I'm going to take that advice and run with it.
Well, you know, Barry, it's interesting that you say that. We actually teach 2 classes. We refer to that getting stuck as a plateau. And we have 2 classes that address that specifically. So it's great advice, and it was advice you can see back from the 1950s when you learned it, and it's still valid today. All right?
It is.
That should be the patch of the Ghost Army, I think, if you're seeing that.
Actually, it came out blank, Rich.
Oh, okay. It's not. It was. I was trying to share something, but it was pretty small in the center anyway. So.
All right. Well, look, I don't want to hold these 2 young.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is. Yep.
I don't want to hold these 2 young men much longer. Especially Barry had the procedure on his eyes, and I'm sure it's maybe time for lunch or whatever, or to go out where it's nice.
Can I ask one more question real quick?
Yes.
My dad said that he remembered a radio, the PRC-9. Does that sound familiar?
Well, we don't know these things. Anybody want to take a quick look on the internet before
I'm familiar with the PRC-90, if that's what you're talking about.
Maybe that was it.
It was a handheld emergency radio, handheld radio.
Right, right.
Mhm.
We used to take that out on our patrols when we left the truck.
Can anybody quickly pull up a PRC 90 photo before we go?
Yes, I've got one here, Howard.
Okay, share your screen, Tristan.
The Angry 50, the ANG 55 too.
PRC 90.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, I could see it. It does look a little familiar.
Well, you're talking about, 70-something years. So
It looks like a walkie-talkie.
Yeah, that's what he said. It was portable. Very good work, Tristan. Thank you. Okay, everybody. I think we're going to wrap this one up now. I think we all have to.
Norman, excuse me.
On what was that, Nick?
If you go on the computer, put in the Ghost Army, there was a lot of writing and there's pictures. There's pictures of me in there with, and at the end of it, there's 4 pictures of us being old. But if you wave the mouse over it, they turn to where we were young.
Okay. Well, We do have.
Also, they have an exhibit in the museum, the World War II museum in New Orleans, and they expect to put another exhibit over in Brest, in France.
All right. Well, we have the links for the club, for the Ghost Army, and everybody can look through this, and we will find you. We're definitely going to keep in touch anyhow, Nick. So I want you and Barry to come to any classes that you want. I'll talk to your son and daughter about how to do that and how to find the schedule anytime that you want to come in. And Barry, would you like to be an honorary lifetime member to the club too?
Oh, yes.
And maybe we can brush you up on your Morse code too, huh?
That would be fun.
So you won't have to do dum dum diddy anymore. You'll actually get it, you know?
Maybe even get them to come to one of our outings, Howard. That would be cool.
Or maybe lunch at the Miller Edge Inn. Once we start doing that, if there's a consensus to go back to
Definitely.
that would be great. I have to find out what the social distancing rules are for that. Well, listen, let's all unmute. Let's give a really thundering.
Here.
Very, very unique experience, something that we're probably never going to have again. So thank you both for coming. I don't know what that picture is there. But we'll wrap it up, and thank you guys for coming. Why don't you just please stay a few minutes for me after this, and everybody else, good afternoon, and have a nice weekend.
It's